Okay. So first, just as usual, going to do some housekeeping announcements. The Hacks podcast is live. I believe we're releasing episodes of that every week. I've listened to a couple of them. They're entertaining and informative, which is what you want out of a podcast. So, and they are available on all of the platforms. So Apple, Google, and Spotify, I believe. Yeah, so you can find them there. Upcoming events. So we were in the process of scheduling some meetups in various cities in light of coronavirus precautions happening. We are putting in-person meetups on hold for a little while. We will be scheduling a virtual meetup for mid-April.
Ja,
I'm in the process.
is goed.
What?
Ja,
Okay, what?
Oh, I think it was just being unmuted, Cassandra. You can continue.
Oh, it looked like Herbert was talking.
Nee hoor, dit is nog niet het begin van de eindtijd.
Okay. We good? All right. So anyway, we're going to be doing a virtual meetup so that people can still, have chances to learn and collaborate together while we can't meet in person. On a related note, we are talking through the logistics of SaltConf EU. It's not until June, so we won't be making any decisions for a couple weeks yet. And then last week, the core team, we met to do release planning for Sodium, to plan some of the features and things we're changing in the product. And then on my end of things, we actually did release planning for a lot of the things community related that we want to smooth out and take care of. And so the goal is by the end of this release for everybody to have one kind of landing page where you can go to find out events, information, find a repository, find news, blog posts, all those things. And that'll be on the community.saltstack website. We'll be doing some website updates on that soon. And then the other thing is that we're going to have regular opportunities for the core team and contributors to collaborate together and put some process around that so everybody knows when to expect things that are coming. One of my first steps in implementing all of that is I'm going to be sending out a community interest survey. It's going to mostly gauge kind of people's preferred communication outlets, people's interest in doing things like maybe hackathons and code jam sort of events, as well as some of these office hours and work groups. And then there was a third topic. I don't remember what the other one was. But those were the two main ones, was to make sure we're communicating to everybody effectively and then make sure that everybody's getting the opportunities to collaborate that they might want. So those are my major updates, but please, once I get that survey out, I'll be sharing it on Google, IRC, and Slack. I'll give it about a week for people to give feedback, and then it'll be like 5 to 7 questions. It's not going to be a lot. And then use that information to start building out and prioritizing some changes. Let's see what else. Oh, and then next on the agenda, well, does anybody have questions about any of those commitments? Okay. So next item is the agendas for the open hour. We are, for the moment, going to just be using a Google form to take people's requests and submissions. We did have a community member who made a ton of good suggestions and questions to bring up in the open hour. We're going to talk through and prioritize those and bring those up next week. Since we got those during release week, we were all kind of heads down, but we will be talking through a lot of those things next week. And then I'll be setting up a Google form, sending that out. We will basically close that out on Tuesday afternoons and then publish the agenda by end of day Wednesday. Anything that comes up after Wednesday can go into future open hours. And in among those open hours, we'll be doing probably once a month a open hour dedicated purely to a specific topic. I believe the first one of those is going to be testing, but we'll spend an hour kind of going over testing and the testing process, and then use those to address some of our other frequent questions. So lots of organization and putting things in place right now on our end, and hopefully a couple months from now we have everything smooth and we can collaborate and make cool things happen.
Yeah, one comment to add, Cassandra. I think this particular topic about the testing has been very high on people's minds and the feedback. So if you hear this through this particular recording or the minutes that we will share afterwards, please help us spread the word to the rest of the community, because we're scheduling those clinics And of course, the soonest we get a contingent of people, we'll log that date that Cassandra talked about. But hopefully, within a couple of weeks, we'll be running one of those. And the idea of those test clinics is just to be familiar with the test framework we're using, best practices for writing some of tests as you submit your PR, which ultimately all goes hand in hand with getting the PR from the moment it's sort of submitted to actually being merged, moving much smoother and much faster. So yeah, please help us spread the word. Thank you, Cassandra, for bringing that one up.
You're welcome. So from here, somebody on the core team is going to chat about the point release, and I'm going to be quiet.
Yeah, so the point release, we're moving towards getting that out. We have had a few delays in getting some tests working and getting those fixed. I think we're well on our way now, and we're going to be seeing that march forward. And just a brief update there. Daniel, did you have anything you wanted to bring up there? Anybody else on the team? Megan? Yeah.
Nope, nothing to add.
I'll add just one more comment. In the announcement channel itself, I believe Cassandra or Sage, you posted an update on 3000.1. So one of the common questions we get is what made it into 3000.1? There is a link in there into the dashboard, which you can actually see the PRs that are going to be included as part of that effort. So if you're wondering, there's an easy link to actually get into that dashboard.
Well, I'm guessing that link is going to actually be empty. Like there won't be anything on that page.
Because we moved it in the complete, yes, yeah. We'll need to update that one.
So you could search for the label,
yes,
3000.1 and closed or merged.
I can actually update that link with the merged.
All right.
That's great. Yeah, let's update that link actually. That'll be useful. I'll resend it out.
Will do.
Thank you.
Now, what's next?
Next, well, point release. So next, let's chat about two-factor authentication. I know that we've started making steps to enforce that, and we want to kind of lay out a timeline for everybody so you know what to expect.
Yeah, so I've reached out to several people. We've had a lot of people update that within the community. Thank you to everybody who has and for working with us on that. There still are some that are outstanding, and so I am working with a few people to get that in place, and we'll still be communicating. We're looking at a 2-week time frame that we'll still really start blasting more communication about that, and then we will start looking at removing access at that time, so 2 weeks from today. Any questions
So
about that?
basically, warning, warning, if you don't act, you will lose access.
Yes. And I feel like we've had,
What day was that again?
so 2 weeks from today is, let's actually look, I'll tell you exactly. That will be the 26th of March that we'll start looking at removing access. And hopefully what will happen there is that those profiles are either stale, no longer in use, and the people that do want to be a part of the org, that are part of the community, are active and have everything enabled for two-factor, and or it will come out in the next 2 weeks and we'll get them set up. That's our hope. That's what we want. That's where we want to involve the community. And so I'm hoping for that. So just giving some more communication about that in case people were out and haven't heard, and continue to do that. And then hopefully it just goes well. That's all I've got about that.
Any questions for Sage? Okay, so I actually, so please team, feel free to actually post your questions in the chat of the Zoom if there are any from any team members. Some people seem to prefer to send those on Slack on DMs, but obviously if we get them in the Zoom, we get them recorded and everybody gets the benefit. I actually have 2 of them in here in the DMs, so I'll go ahead and share one and maybe start the answer, and Sage and rest of the team can feel free to jump in. The first question that I have in here is that, can you please elaborate on the planning that occurred last week with the core team? What topics were covered and what should we expect to come out of that? At the end of every release cycle team, we gather up the core team members to take input from everything we've heard from the community and so on. And we essentially discuss topics that affect us all, that are related to some priorities, but also how can we do process improvements, tackle some of the debt that we have. This particular cycle, we focused our energy on a couple of areas. The first of which is all around community organization, which Cassandra touched on. So the elements of making sure that we have consistent communications, input for agendas, the consistency of the open hours, minuting and sharing the output of those particular dialogues, creating a much more rapid response cycle for feedback items that the community are sharing, expanding our community communication channels beyond Slack to the IRC, as well as the mailing lists and so on and so forth, and Twitter, and making sure that we have consistency across all of those. All of those are example of topics that we've really tackled within the community aspect. We also tackled within that particular thread of community, we tackled the discussion around the experience of a community member, which we've heard a lot of feedback on. For example, many of our community members would love to be a little bit more aware of statuses of PRs, or they would like to understand, who's reviewing them, or they're trying to understand, as we just shared a moment, and what's going inside of a release or not. They would like to understand where we are within the release cycle. Are we entering test? Are we entering? And have some heads up on a lot of that. Hey, we're going to deliver an RC, give them a little bit heads up. So that whole idea of transparency of the project, the information related to it, and the experience of a community member who's quite generously and gracefully been helping us and adding some of their time, how can we make that whole experience smoother for them? And we've come up with a variety of actions that we will implement in the next couple of weeks and months and ongoing, that we will be very happy to share, as we sort of documented them in the next week or so. That's one particular thread. The second thread that we covered as a team is some important processes that affect us all. Triage process, PR submission, from PR submission to merge processes, test processes, and so on and so forth. The great news is on the test side, for example, we have a testing work group that has participation from multiple community members. So we've been taking some of those ideas and starting to think through, how do we increase unit testing? How do we increase coverage for some of the core modules? What effort is needed to be able to actually get us to get some of the fragility inside of the framework to be improved. All of those things we're going to be applying resources to work on, and of course recruit the community to help us. So we're looking forward for the testing work group to share some of those ideas back out to the broader community in an upcoming open hour. Another process is triage. Sage and Megan and various team members have published some guidelines that we've been following, but we recognize that that's a particular process that we want to work through a little bit more deliberately, and it requires us to bring in other functions within the organization, the support team that's getting these tickets, as well as the product management team that looks at the patterns across all of these and decides to prioritize. So that's underway, and at some point in the future, perhaps a couple of weeks out, we will share the feedback on that. Again, if you have questions and ideas on that, send us in. And lastly, which is the one I think that is important to all of us, is you know, the aspect of being able to get our code in and get that merged very quickly and make it into the releases. Obviously, we now all know what our cadence is. We have very clear dates as to when we are getting sodium out, when are we going to get magnesium out, when are we going to get aluminum out, or aluminum, as I'm told every now and then. So we have all of those dates, and we now know that at least we have 90 to 120 day cycles in which we can get our PRs in. We do have a large backlog. That's not a secret. And one of the great, community member suggestions was to maybe play back to the community. What are those PRs? What can we do to collectively together burn, those PRs down? And that's exactly a piece of work we're actually about to finish as part of the planning, which is to do analysis around burnout rates. We're going to institute maybe even a PR burn down jam, or a code jam, where we'll invite people to do a hackathon style, if you like, jam, where we sit down and tackle as many PRs and bring those down. But we will also be very transparent around what our expectations should be. What point in time are we going to get the 900 moved from the master, which is a priority goal for us, and the 500 open ones, how fast are we going to get those down? So you will hear from us very shortly around our game plan and the burn down rate that we expect. And of course, I cannot personally be more grateful or thankful on behalf of the team for everybody who's offered to help us and who's been helping us take those PRs down. And so a pretty long-winded answer, but hopefully it was transparent enough and complete enough to give everybody a feel for what are the type of things that we were addressing as part of our release planning. Any other comments from the team members, please, that we might have missed?
I guess the one thing that I would mention, I think Mo kind of mentioned this, but I wouldn't gloss over it. This team actually got to have a chance to do personas within the community, as well as other people within personas within who our customers are and who we interact with. And that was a really great experience, I think, for this team to then go into some of these process discussions. It creates an empathy mapping of how people use SALT and how they expect to be communicated with and understood. And that was a really great experience. I think the team actually really enjoyed that, and I know I did.
Thank you, Sage.
Are there any additional questions you have, Mo? I don't
Yeah, the second one actually is similar to the first one, so let me just read it here. The second one said, Cassandra mentioned that we got input from the community members that we will share next week. Can you elaborate on what those are? So I'm happy to take a stab at this. Actually, I did cover some of this. It happens to actually coincide with what we did as part of the planning. But I will talk to some of those. The first one was related to essentially the backlog. And there was some suggestions around actually putting PR burn down targets or a timetable that says by the time we get to sodium, the 900 that we have as part of the porting effort that we initiated a couple of months ago, we expect that much to go down, etc., the 500, and then publish out what our PR review and execution cycle looks like. Another suggestion that was brought forward was regarding communications. So there is a little bit suggestions for better practices around the use of Slack and being able to help people get into the channels that are appropriate for topics. The notion that some of the topics are scattered between general, develop, announcements, and so on means that not everybody is able to track some of these threads related to releases, etc. So that's something that we will be picking up around, the communication, and we will put that as part of sort of the community mandate again out to help people who are new to the community, but also who have been here for a while, to sort of concentrate their efforts into specific channels that facilitate the right discussion on the right topic. A third one that was out there, just for an example, is to be able to look at a dashboard, see immediately, you know, where is the PR, why is it been merged, why is it not being merged, is there something of an error, etc. And again, that's part of us automating much of our framework and making some of these available. So we're going to look to share our update on that. And then, of course, that will take us a few cycles to work through, but we're certainly making a start. And lastly, in this particular point, there was discussion around labels again, you know, and how we use labels, etc. And essentially, part of the issue is how do we enable more people to have the authority to assign labels, if possible, or easily change labels. And again, part of that is so that we don't end up with many PRs that are unlabeled, and therefore people do not know where they stand, and we're bottlenecked on a few handful of people who are trying to make those updates. And that's certainly something that we are discussing as well, and figuring out how we use the GitHub permissions that would allow people to do that without necessarily you know, exposing further permissions that we don't necessarily want to enable right away, you know, without some sort of a timetable around that. So those were the suggestions that came in. I think they're all wonderful. I'm very thankful to Mike Place and team who actually raised those. And as I said, that will be the subject of our discussions for the next open hour and probably a couple more to come. Again, did I miss anything, Cassandra or team?
Sounded complete to me. And then Tobias just posted a question in the chat. He said, is there any sense of the timeline or prioritization of the work being done with pop item to migrate the functionality of SALT to a new architectural foundation?
Yeah, I can start, and Tom can certainly elaborate and give a lot more details on that one. The entry statement on that, Tobias, and thank you for the question, is a great one, is the first thing we've done as part of the cycle is that we've allocated dedicated resources to go ahead and start to accelerate the work around maturing the POP components, including things like item. And what Tom has done is he's now finalizing a view of the user stories, MVPs, and so on that he wants to work through. If there are specific areas around item, et cetera, that you would like us to see, you know, progress fast, et cetera, I would directly engage with Tom on those to make sure that we, of course, get those prioritized. But Tom, I think it's appropriate that you share a little bit more insights as to the research work and acceleration work that you're driving.
Yeah. So, sorry, collecting my thoughts here still. Right. So what I wanted to do first to experiment with this, to make sure that it's viable, was actually to look at getting grains re-implemented in POP. And so one of our primary goals for this release cycle is to see if we can, we've actually got a fully functional version of grains in POP with almost all grains have moved over to it. We're working on tests right now. And it gets rid of a lot of those really old, long-standing problems inside of grains. So this new implementation, for instance, you can reference grains that have already been generated during generation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It has more optionality for concurrency, right? Just basically the long list of things we're trying to fix with grains. And so I hope to be able to get that into the 3001 release. So that's sodium. Because we do feel that we can do a 100%, it'll be transparent to the user migration, and we would still fully support everybody's existing external grains, right? It would be, nothing would break or anything. And that's really the goal there. So that's a big chunk of the focus right now. The next question is around item. So when it comes to item itself has about 85–90% of the functionality of the salt state system. So I'm planning on this release cycle to finish up trying to get the rest of that functionality into item. We also are trying to figure out the best way to begin that compartmentalization of all of those support components. And if we can make it, we'd like to get a bridge, not a replacement, but a bridge to item, so that item can be called directly from a Salt minion. And that'll just be through an execution module. So that we would theoretically be able to just say, instead of state.sls or state.apply, we could say item.apply, okay? We'll see if we're able to pull that off. We have made considerable progress there. We do currently have item support for Azure, but also a lot's been going into AWS. We also want to sit down, and we're going over a lot of questions about what is it that we can add to item to make sure that from a cloud and API management perspective, that as a configuration engine, it's capable of doing things on the same level, if not better than, faster than, et cetera, than Terraform. And we're also looking at what possible shortcuts we have to get things out more quickly. So yeah, one of the really exciting things is that we're just ending out the first week of us, like Mo said, having a dedicated team on this. To be honest, most of the efforts from an item, almost all the efforts from a POP and item perspective, as well as these R&D teams, have been me, with the occasional support from just pulling somebody out from other teams for a week or two. But now we've got a dedicated team that's working on this. So it'll be interesting to see just how far along how far we can get on some of these goals. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does a good job of answering the question. And another question as a follow-on from that is if there's any sort of good central place to look for ways that people that I or my team could help contribute to driving that forward.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of what we're trying to get out right now is actually even just getting all that documentation laid out. And one of the things that's been interesting as this becomes more heavily tangential into just everything that I'm trying to do over there, one of the things that's been really interesting is we've just started to have people use POP for standalone projects and get feedback there. And we've had deeper understanding of what we want to do. And with a lot of these efforts, we've also uncovered, well, there's a few more places that we should shore up and change how POP works while it's still early, right? So what you're going to be seeing in the next few weeks is we just released POP 9. I'm going to come out with POP 10 here pretty soon. Things are moving very quickly. But what you are going to see is more documentation around how things can be migrated over. You're going to see a lot more example code on how we have migrated different aspects of the platform over. And you're going to see a lot more documentation there. At this point, we haven't solved kind of the unified documentation problem quite yet. I'm getting closer there. And we need kind of a high-level ecosystem documentation, because as you probably noticed, it's all about breaking things up into little pluggable repositories, right? So that it's really, really easy to say, oh, my Red Hat supports over here, my Rackspace Cloud supports over here, you know, my Solaris supports over in this other repo, so that everything can be isolated and iterated on much more quickly than through the very heavy salt process that we have today. And so, yes, I'm sorry, Tobias, I just don't have those docs ready yet. I'm going as fast as I can.
That's fine.
But yeah, that's definitely on the list.
And one last question there is curious if there's any sort of cookie cutter or skeleton framework for people who are interested in building out new POP implementations to contribute to the overall effort.
There definitely are. So if you go to gitlab.com/saltstack/pop, and I'll throw that in the chat when I'm done yammering. We've got a lot of projects on there. that have the beginning of code as to what these things should look like. I would caveat that with some of these are a little early and they're still a little malleable. But we've actually got some pretty darn good examples up there. And I am going to be renaming a lot of them. A lot of these are just named pop whatever, and that needs to be changed. But we do have a lot of code examples up there. Also, if you do go to the pop docs, I'm working on, I got a little stalled on this. I'm working on putting a book together that just kind of says, hey, here's an hour or so of reading about, this is the whole pop philosophy and why it's useful. And a nice kind of bootstrap into this is what pop is. I almost finished, and then I realized that there were logical limitations in how I'm covering configuration loading, and so I had to stop and rewrite all that. So I've almost got that ready. But then also in the pop docs that are up there now on pop.readthedocs.io, we do have documentation on how to use pop seed. So it's really, really easy to use pop seed and set up a pop dynamic name that says, hey, I'm going to be extending this plugin subsystem with these extra modules. So as we move forward, there's a little bit of documentation now. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in Pound Pop. In the community Slack, Tyler's in there, and he can be very helpful as we're, again, still trying to get these documents a little more formalized.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're fantastic to ask and be looking.
Yeah, Tobias, I wonder if it would be helpful for us to also maybe just block some dedicated time for you and the team that works for you with Tyler to go over POP and maybe just do a little bit of show and tell or a light, orientation around it, if that helps.
I'm fairly familiar with it. I've been digging into it for a bit. I actually had Thomas on my podcast a little while back to talk about it, so pretty familiar with this system. Just holding off for a little bit because I've got a bunch of other things right now, but I'll probably start getting my hands dirty maybe over the next few weeks.
Awesome. That's great. And if we can help, as Tom said, you can reach Tyler, of course, immediately, or if something, more organized is required, we'll be happy to help.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Tobias. You're awesome.
I don't have any more questions on my DM, Cassandra. I don't know if any other team members got any comments or questions that came through.
I have not received any other questions. And I don't see any in the chat or in my Slack. Does anybody have any additional questions or comments? No. Well, I appreciate all of you who are asking questions, who are attending these meetings, who are kind of giving your insight and inputs. This is how we make this community better and more effective for all of us. So thank you all for coming in, answering good questions, offering suggestions. Those of you who've had, things where you might want to collaborate with us, we can follow up with you over time as we make changes there. And I guess stay tuned for some new news outlets, and please take, the 5 minutes to fill out that community interest survey I'll be sending out.
And stay safe.
And stay safe. Yes.
Wash your hands.
Don't shake hands. Don't leave the house. Don't touch your face.
Don't touch Shane.
Yeah. Let me see if I can do that. Is that right?
I don't know if I can do that.
Live long and prosper.
I lose geek cred for not being into Star Trek. All right, everybody. Well, thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, team.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.